Hi there, I'm Reed Peterson, and welcome to Grief Refuge. Thanks for listening today and letting Grief Refuge be a resource to help you cope with your loss and support you through grieving. I'd like to personally welcome you, whether this is your first time listening or if you've heard my voice before. The mission of Grief Refuge is to provide daily support to help you find peace and purpose after experiencing a death-related loss. What we do here at Grief Refuge is we offer our Grief Refuge app. We offer free webinars and support groups, programming, and also retreats to ensure that you feel comforted, soothed, supported, and cared for. Grief can be so isolating, can be guilt-ridden, shameful, and painful in ways that seem impossible to endure. Grief Refuge is here to help. I'm glad you're listening to the Grief Refuge podcast because here we have the often ignored conversations about grief. We go deep into the emotional hardships, and we hope that what you hear on this podcast helps validate your authentic experience. It helps you honor your loved one, and it helps you gain insights for how to navigate your own grief journey. Grieving is one of the hardest things a human can go through. I'm honored you're here, and I promise to do everything I can to provide the best support to you. Before we begin today's insights, I have a couple important things to share. Because of the nature and the depth of this topic, it may be more beneficial to not multitask while listening. Rather, I invite you to use this time for your self-care and your personal reflection. So please use this time to settle in, to feel grounded, and to allow your grief-related feelings to run their course. If anything, please use this time to mourn your loss. Also, this podcast is currently publishing episodes once a month. When you're grieving, that's a lot of time in between each episode, and most likely you're going to need more resources to feel more supported. If that's true for you right now, please download the Grief Refuge app. It provides daily support that I mentioned moments ago, and the app has several features that help guide and support you through the grief process. A short testimonial from a real grieving person named Melissa said, quote, "I'm so blessed to have found this app. This app answered a lot of my questions and is really helping me get through my grief." End quote. So where do you find the Grief Refuge app? Actually, it's pretty easy to find. It's right on your phone, on the App Store, and it's a free download. Please search for Grief Refuge and download it now to get the daily support you may need. Now, as far as what we're going to go into today, I'm going to share a webinar replay about grieving and isolation. The webinar shares some important insights from some of the world's leading experts on grief support. If isolation has been something you've felt during your grief, this information is for you. As you listen in, do your best to let go of any self-judgments you may have about how you're grieving. Please enjoy the information shared regarding this important topic.
Well, hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm grateful that you're here to join me in this special event to talk about grieving and isolation. We've got a lot to cover today, and if you read between the lines, it's a bit of a interactive webinar. I'm putting air quotes around interactive. There'll be opportunities to share reactions. If you're familiar with Zoom, I'll teach you that in a second. There will also be opportunities to enter responses in the chat. I want to make sure that you're seen, you're heard. And in addition to all that, there will be a couple opportunities to meet some fellow participants. Zoom has amazing technology. They have the capacity to put people into what we call breakout rooms. And so I'll be prompting you throughout our time together to have small discussions, small group discussions. And that's actually optional. When the breakout room is created, there is an opportunity to accept it to be put into a breakout room to have a small group discussion. So just know that if you choose not to, you can stay on the larger group with me. I'll probably be taking breaks and looking at my notes to prepare you for the next phase or next part of the process. I'm riding solo tonight. Right now we have about 25 people on the call, and believe it or not, folks, about 190 signed up. So I'm gonna have to be double dipping as far as being my own tech hands, in addition to being tonight's facilitator. So with that said, I feel like I got my work cut out for me. So even as I'm speaking, I'm entering or allowing people to enter into the meaning itself, and more people will trickle in, excuse me. So as I learn how to multitask, in addition to be tonight's presenter and facilitator, I'm going to start us off by helping us get more familiar with the chat function. If you are able to, whether it's on your phone or whether it's on your computer, Zoom has this amazing feature called chat. And if you tap it on your phone or if you click it on your computer, I am going to start off the meeting tonight by asking a very unique question. And this question can be pleasant or unpleasant experiences, but if you will, to get the party started today, please enter into the chat what in the last 24 hours, what has either unpleasantly or pleasantly surprised you? And as you think about that, and as you enter in your your response, feel free to peer through what other people's responses are to see if there's a like a special connection, a familiarity, an understanding, or something that is now even not surprising for you. So, and as we do that, I'll take a pause for a moment, take a look at the chat myself, and then we will get rolling. Okay, so the highlighted response that I see so far is, making it through Mother's Day without a meltdown. That's a very honest response, and I appreciate that from our comment from Patty on that. Also, someone received a check they didn't expect. Hey, if it's a check for money, big thumbs up to you. And so, yes, I'm going to, let me make sure that everybody's muted too as we do that. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen, and we're actually going to get started. But first, bear with me 1 second. I'm going to find one of our participants and help her become a co-host so that she can admit people while I go through the presentation. Okay, so as we know, tonight we're going to be discussing grieving in isolation. And I'll give you a little bit of insight as to why this topic became on the forefront of my mind. And as a student, to better understanding how people grieve and also how they heal, I've heard this word isolation a lot. And it's a very common experience by all who, well, not all, but many people who experience grief. And what I find ironic, sad, and interesting all at the same time is that even in moments of being in a support group specifically made for grief, one can still feel isolated. So I got really curious and put on my scholarly hat to try to understand, why does that happen? And so that will be the focus of the first part of our presentation tonight. So if you were here at the very, very beginning, I mentioned this thing about in Zoom, the ability to share what we call reactions. So if you can find on your Zoom screen, send me a heart if you feel like you've experienced some isolation in your own grieving process. Now, I feel like part of me says, oh, that's a dumb question because, that's what we're here for. But at the same time, I know that some of you are here to support others. I know that some of you are here for your own educational experience. And so, it's good to see the hearts. It's good to see that we're on the same page. And it's good to know that we'll be exploring that. It's kind of a fun approach tonight. It's a bit of a hybrid of tapping into our expert authors in the United States of America, in addition to sharing some thoughts and reflections from my perspective, but also being able to hear and see some of your own. So there we go. Now, I don't know how that's possible, but somebody's drawing on my presentation. I don't know if you know that you're doing that, but if you are, can you please refrain from doing that? Otherwise, this is going to be a very, very strange and unusual presentation. Okay, so a little bit about our tonight's experience. Excuse me, I'm on the East Coast, so I keep referring it to tonight. I realize that for some of you, it's still the middle of the day. I realize for some of you, it's not even evening yet. So my apologies if you hear me say tonight. It's been a fulfilled day here on the East Coast, and so I might slip throughout our time together. But in regards to tonight, let's see what I mean. In regards to our experience for today, I'm clearly stating our objectives. As I said just moments ago, we're going to explore some perspectives for why grief actually feels so isolating. Perspectives from some of the top authors in the United States of America, and perspectives from your own experiences too. Once we transition from why grief feels so isolating, we will then transition into what can be done to feel less isolation and to feel stronger sense of connection. I don't know if connection is an antonym of isolation, but I think in the grief experience, I feel like it's pretty fair to say that it is. And then in the last part of the evening, I will be covering a new group that I'm starting on May 30th. And that group I'm really excited about because it's kind of like this hybrid of a support group and also a course. It's almost like this experiment course. I've titled it Feeling Less Alone. I'll go into details about that later. So those are our objectives. Now, in my school of learning about grief and supporting people in grief, specifically with the Center for Loss and Life Transition, I've come across this word a lot by my mentor, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and it's the word about intentions. And sometimes people say, especially in the professional world, they speak to goals. But intentions, I feel like, have a little bit more clarity in the direction going forward. It's almost like committing more of your energy into something. It's less of an idea and more of an action in addition to an idea. So in the experience today, I have two specific intentions. I want to share resources to help you gain a deeper understanding about our topic of today, grieving in isolation. I also have an intention, as always, whether that's I work with somebody individually, I facilitate a group, I lead a retreat, or even use technology for the Grief Refuge app. I'm always intending to create a safe space so that you feel supported, and that if, in tonight's experience, since there are many people, you feel a sense of connection and you also feel validation for your grief journey. Everybody's grief journey is unique. And so validation has become a very important piece to that experience. So a little bit about me. My name's Reed Peterson. I founded a company called Grief Refuge. And Grief Refuge initially started by having a mobile application. It helps people feel soothed. It helps people feel comforted, and it helps people feel validated in their grief experience. And so I've come up with 3 words that I feel like describe a little bit about my personality. Some of you on the call today, you've worked with me one-on-one, and you understand that I am a sensitive person. In fact, I would go as far as to say I'm a highly sensitive person. Some of you in the experience today may also be familiar and also identify with that experience. I've written an article on highly sensitive people in grief. I published it, I believe, 2 years ago. And to this day, to my surprise, it's still one of the few resources available on the internet that is specific to the topic of blending grieving and HSP, highly sensitive person. In addition to that, I'm very empathetic. I actually have a background in counseling. I never became a certified or licensed counselor to do therapeutic mental health work because I always believed that most people who need support, they actually need it in the form of caregiving. Now, I know many of you are mental health practitioners who are on this call right now. I don't have any judgment. I believe in mental health. I've worked with counselors in my past. My wife happens to be a licensed psychologist. So I'm all for our mental health model. I've just come to learn that in providing grief support, many of the people that I encounter specifically, they need to be cared for. They need to be nurtured. They need to be understood and seen and heard and validated. They don't necessarily need a diagnosis and they don't need a treatment. And so that's a bit more about my empathetic perspective. The last thing I'll say very personally is that I'm a very reserved person. You put me in a crowd, I actually would come across as being shy. I'd be probably perceived as being a little aloof. And I like to say I'm reserved because I'm feeling into the energy to see if it's more supportive to me or if it's a little bit threatening. And so I've got to process that almost every environment I go. And that makes a bit about myself feel what I would fairly say is reserved. So now it's time for you. Again, I would love for you to use the chat function. And in a few moments, if you can, try to come up with 3 words that help describe a little bit about yourself. And we'll take a moment to pause there. I'll give you a minute. Okay, thank you for your participation in that. I so appreciate it. It's good to learn a little bit more about you. Like I said, in a few moments, there actually will be more opportunities within small group breakout room to share a little bit more about your background and to share a little bit more about your experience so far. And I will provide the prompts. Don't worry about that. But thank you for at least getting things started. We'll continue with the presentation. Okay, so we're going to start by trying to understand a little bit more about why grief feels so isolating, actually with a few quotes. Now, I'm going to ask you, again, a little bit of participation. This is a very interactive experience. So if you have a pen near you, grab a pen. And if you have a piece of paper, pull that to your side too, because I'm going to ask you to be keeping score. I'm going to share 4 quotes in addition to what we see on the screen here, and I'll read this in a second. But I'm going to share 4 quotes from real people who have experienced some deep grief. And so what I'm going to ask you is I'm going to ask you to keep score. Give yourself a check mark if you feel like you resonate with the upcoming quotes. Now, to prep us for this experience, I'm going to read this quote here by, she's world famous. She's an author. She's a researcher on emotion. She has a newer series, a limited series on HBO called Atlas of the Heart. She's had stuff on Netflix. Chances are you know her. Her name is Brene Brown. And she said this about grief that I just thought was like a good overview into our experience of understanding why grief feels so isolating. So Brene Brown says, grief is the price we pay for love, but it's also the price we pay for isolation. When we feel most alone, it's often because we miss the person who made us feel most connected. Okay, so there's your little example. So if you've got that pen or pencil or marker or crayon, whatever you want, and you have a piece of paper, put a little check mark next. Give yourself a mark if you feel like you resonate with that quote. Now I'm going to read 4 more. And so as I read through these, be sure to add your check marks. So this is from a woman named Andrea. Now, Andrea has been a grief refuge group participant in the past. And so what Andrea says is, isolation has been a huge thing for me this past year. I feel like I'm ruining relationships because of my tendency to isolate. I feel stuck and I'm not sure what to do with it. I'll have good days where I feel social, but it seems more often than not, I just want to isolate myself. Can anyone relate? So if you can relate to Andrea's statement here, give yourself a little mark on that, wherever you're keeping your scorecard. Okay, so we've gone through 2, we'll go through 3 more. This next quote is from Lexi. Lexi, I believe, was also in an online group hosted by Grief Refuge. And Lexi shared, quote, I'm worried that I've become a burden to people in my life, including those who are my support system, like my friends and family. So if you feel like that resonates with you, give yourself a little check mark. The next quote is from Debbie. Debbie says, I don't tell people how I feel because I don't want them to judge me. Again, please give yourself a little check mark if that is a statement that resonates with you. And are we through 4 or are we through 5? We'll find out. So this is from Jessica. I believe this is our 5th one. This might be the last one of the experience or this little exercise. And Jessica says, I don't understand grief. I feel like I'm on an island surrounded by people, but yet I'm still alone. So if that resonates, please give yourself a check mark. I'm just gonna go forward. And so we've gone through 5 quotes, including Brene Brown, and then 4 people who have had grief refuge experiences. And so if you were keeping score, here's what we're gonna do. For breakout session number 1, I'm gonna put you into a small group. It looks like there's 36 people on this webinar right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm gonna put you into a breakout room. You have to accept it in order to join. And I'm gonna limit to 4 people. And then in that time, there's gonna be 8 minutes total to share what your score is and share a little bit more about your background. You know, you can share where you're from, you can share your types of loss or losses, or you can just kind of share, you know, what your day's been like. This is the opportunity to connect with some others. And so let me set up the breakout rooms. Give me one moment, and then we'll get you on your way. Okay, so we're coming back to the larger group. For those of you that joined the breakout room, I hope that you had a wonderful experience. There will be one more opportunity to reconvene and carry on the conversation. There will be another prompt, but you know, with the hope that the experience was enjoyable, there will be an opportunity to further the discussion. So that's, you know, that's one of the fun things about these interactive type webinars. So let me share my screen one more time, and we'll continue on taking a deeper dive into why grief can feel so isolating. Okay, so we did breakout session number 1. So as I said just a moment ago, we're going to take a deeper dive into why grief can feel so isolating. So in my I guess, research, I don't have a better term for it, but in my research of gathering information for this experience, I found five authors who have written books about grief, grieving, healing, mourning. Many of them have written more than one book, but they're kind of, uh, I'm hesitant to use the word popular, but they're often familiar by a lot of people who have a grieving experience, and somehow a book gets on their shelf or on their lap or something like that. So if you're not muted, please mute yourself, just in case you need to get up and shuffle around while I present this. And I'm going to share this. These are quotes also, and these are, well, I take that back. They're not direct quotes. They're kind of paraphrased summaries from these experts. So first we have Bob Niemeyer. Now, Bob Niemeyer is an academic. I believe he's a professor at the University of Memphis, but he also runs the Portland, Oregon, the Portland Institute for Loss and Transition. And so Bob Niemeyer, a very gentle soul. I've seen him on a lot of webinars, haven't directly learned from him, but definitely can tell well-intended. He says grief is deeply personal and it's difficult to articulate to others. So I'm going to read a little bit more information about, some of the perspective that Bob Niemeyer provides as far as why grief is so isolating. And he also says that, he says, firstly, grief is a deeply personal experience that it's often difficult to articulate to others. It can be hard to find the right words to describe what you're feeling, which can create a sense of isolation and disconnection from others. Secondly, grief can be an uncomfortable topic for others to discuss, which can lead to people feeling hesitant to bring it up in conversation. This can leave grieving individuals feeling like they're unable to talk about their experience with others, further exacerbating their sense of isolation. And then thirdly, Bob Niemeyer says, grief is often a long and unpredictable process, which can make it hard for others to understand what a grieving person is going through. This can lead to feelings of loneliness and isolation, as others may not be able to relate to their experience or offer meaningful support. So I'm going to ask of you, riding our theme of interaction, I'm going to ask of you, send a heart reaction, or what other reactions are there? The clap or thumbs up, just to show that, your resonance or resonance, not resonations, resonance with Bob Niemeyer's perspective on why grief can feel so isolating. All right, another perspective from another author is Megan Devine. Megan Devine has a brand or business called Refuge in Grief. And Refuge in Grief, please don't get it confused with Grief Refuge. That was not intended. We have two separate organizations, but somehow, they do get mixed up. There are a lot of people. What's funny is, just a little funny joke. A lot of people who find the Grief Refuge app and download it often say they found it because they read my book. Well, I haven't published a book yet. So I'm pretty sure that they're referring to Megan Devine's book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay, which is a fantastic book. And if you want to feel validated for your unique grieving experience, I recommend that as a resource to read. It's Okay That It's Not Okay by Megan Devine. So Megan says, here on the screen, our culture tends to shy away from conversations about death and grief. And I'm going to read a little bit more from her perspective. Okay, so Megan Devine, this grief expert and author, she's written about grief and why it can feel so isolating. According to Megan Devine, one reason for this is that our culture tends to shy away from conversations about death and grief. Megan Devine believes that our society is uncomfortable with grief and often expects people to move on too quickly after loss, which can leave grieving individuals feeling unsupported and isolated. And so she also notes that grief, it's a deeply individual experience. Many people, not always, are able to relate to what a grieving person is going through. This can lead to a sense of disconnection, a sense of loneliness, and grieving individuals struggle to find others who can understand and support them. So send a heart or send a thumbs up if you definitely resonate with Megan's perspective. I like how she speaks to culture and society, in addition to grief being so uniquely individual. And going on to our next author, this is David Kessler. David Kessler is kind of like our grief celebrity, if you will. I mean that in a very good way. He's often interviewed on news channels. He's often interviewed on TV specials. Coincidentally, he happens to live in LA area, so maybe that's why he gets all of his camera time. I'm more joking about that. But David has also worked under the wings of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. He's kind of been a protege of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who gets credit for developing the stages of grief. And on this screen, we also see that David Kessler has a website called grief.com, which has just a plethora of resources and programs and experiences that one can have to feel less isolation, more connection. So on this screen, if you haven't read it by now, David Kessler states grief is a unique experience that can't be fully understood by others, even those who have also experienced loss. So, now that we're on our third author, pay attention to what themes start to emerge as these things are being quoted and or paraphrased by these authors. So I'm going to read a little bit more about David Kessler's perspective about why grief is so isolating. David says, he notes that grief is a unique experience. It can't be fully understood by others, even those who have also experienced loss. This can create a sense of isolation and loneliness as grieving individuals struggle to find others who can truly understand what they are going through. He emphasizes that grief can be a very personal experience, with individuals experiencing it in different ways and at different times. This can make it difficult for grieving individuals to connect with others, as their experiences may not be the same as those around them. And then he further says, another reason why grief can feel so isolating is that it can be, so please mute yourself. Somebody, please mute yourself. Thank you. Wrong way. Now you know the other authors. I just gave it away. So Kessler, getting back to Kessler. Many people feel that they need to keep grief to themselves, or that others won't understand if they try to share their feelings. And this obviously leads to a sense of loneliness and disconnection as these individuals struggle to find ways to express their emotions and feel that sense of connection with others. So again, feel free to enter in, heart, an applause, a thumbs up, a reaction, if that resonates with you. And then probably not more as well known in the public eye, but this is Therese Rando. Therese Rando, I think, is a very great educator. I believe she's out of the state of Rhode Island, where she has the Institute for the Study and Treatment of Loss. I actually happen to have this book of hers here. I guess it's considered a classic right now because it was actually written in the 80s, but it's called How to Go On Living When Someone You Love Dies. As an educator myself, I find it extremely resourceful and helpful. And so it could be a great resource for you. I will say it is a little bit authoritative. You'll hear a little bit more in her words. She's I get the sense, I've never met her, I get the sense she's a very direct individual. And so Therese Rando says, grief is a complex and individual experience that is often misunderstood by others. I think I need to slow down with my speech. Okay, so to further her perspective, so according to Rando, grief, it's deeply personal and individual. So with all this happening, it creates this sense of isolation and loneliness as the grieving person struggles to find someone who can truly understand and empathize with their feelings. Now, to me, I'm recognizing these themes. These are starting to sound a little bit more common in the experience. So Rando also notes that our culture tends to have a limited understanding of grief and often expects people to, I'm putting air quotes around it, get over their loss quickly and move on with their lives. This can be particularly difficult for grieving individuals who may feel pressured to suppress their emotions and put on a brave face for others. And as a result, they may not feel comfortable sharing their grief with others, which can further contribute to a sense of isolation and disconnection. So with the reactions, give me a thumbs up or a heart if that kind of feels similar to your experience. We appreciate Therese Rando's perspective as far as why grief can feel so isolating. So we have one more author, and if you were with me at the beginning of the presentation, this happens to be Alan Wolfelt. Alan Wolfelt is my mentor. I learned most of my understanding about grief support and caring for another person, companioning another person who may be experiencing grief. And he runs the Center for Loss and Life Transition out of Fort Collins, Colorado. He does do trainings. I think he does at least 12 a year. And they're great experiences. You can get certified. You have to go through 5 under 150 hours of grief support or grief training. And some of the trainings are in Fort Collins. Some of them are in Scottsdale, Arizona. So enough about Alan. I guess I'm promoting for him. By the way, he's also written over 80 or 90 books on grief. So what does Alan have to say about why grief feels so isolating? On the screen here, it's from Alan. It says, grief often involves a wide range of emotions, some of which can be difficult to express. Now, to further his perspective, so Wolfelt points out that our society often has these unrealistic expectations around grief. Many people expect those who are grieving to move on quickly, and they may not offer the kind of support and empathy that a grieving person needs. This can leave the person feeling even more isolated and disconnected from others. And Wolfelt continues to state that another reason why grief can be so isolating is that it often involves a wide range of emotions, some of which can be very difficult to express. Grieving individuals may feel anger, guilt, sadness, and a host of other emotions, but they may not feel comfortable sharing these feelings with others. So this can lead to a sense of isolation and loneliness as the person struggles to find a way to express their emotions and connect with others. So feel free to enter in a reaction, a thumbs up, a heart, an applause if you feel that that resonates with your experience. But I'm actually going to take a really different angle, and I'm going to give you a little bit of science. Now, some of you scientifically inclined people, you may have heard this a little bit about how our brains function. And this is called the open loop limbic system. Now, I'm by no means any expert on this. I actually found this in a book on a whole different topic, and I'm holding the book up here. It's called Primal Leadership, and it has nothing to do with grief. But I recently came across this, and I thought this is such an amazing example of why grief can feel so isolating as far as how our brains function. So I'm going to read this to you. It's called the open loop. Okay, the open loop is the nature of the limbic system, which is our emotional centers. Whereas a closed loop system, such as the circulatory system within our bodies, that's self-regulating. And what's happening in the circulatory system of others around us, this doesn't impact our own system. But an open loop system depends largely on external sources to manage itself. I mean, that is so mind-boggling. I got to read that again. Our limbic systems, which are open loop, they depend largely on external sources to manage itself. So in other words, we rely on connections with other people for our own emotional stability. The open loop limbic system, this was a winning design in evolution, no doubt, because it allows people to come to one another's emotional rescue. Enabling, for example, like a mother to soothe her crying infant, or a lookout in a primate band to signal an instant alarm when a threat is perceived. So scientists describe this open loop as an interpersonal limbic regulation, whereby one person transmits signals that can alter hormone levels, cardiovascular function, sleep rhythms, and even immune function inside the body of another person. That's how couples who are in love are able to trigger in one another's brain surges of oxytocin, which creates a pleasant, affectionate feeling. And so imagine what it can also do to a grieving individual. Just lost. Okay, but in all aspects of social life, not just love relationships, our physiologies intermingle, our emotions automatically shifting into the register of the person we're with. The open loop design of the limbic system means that other people can change our very physiology, and so our emotions. So like, I feel like science gets a huge mic drop in this experience, because I'm just wowed by reading that. I hope that for you, even if it's hard to hear, I just hope that you hear it as something that just validates how difficult the experience of isolation is in your grieving process. Oh, so yeah, feel free to throw a thumbs up on that one in the reactions if that one you definitely find some resonance with. So I have a very short story about my own personal experience. My come to understanding of why grief can feel so isolating. And I sum it up by saying that when you're grieving, the world around you, it doesn't slow down. But your heart, your brain, your body, your physiology knows you do need to slow down. And so that's a huge disconnect there between you and the world around you. And the brief story to further expand on that is more recently, I was on a hike with my wife and we wanted to see some waterfalls. We're currently living in the Asheville, North Carolina area, and there's some great hikes with waterfalls. And we came across, this path that was right next to a creek. And my wife, Jessica, said, I want to go check out this creek for a second, so we almost like stepped into the creek. And I was just almost like knocked over with an epiphany. And I'm going to show you a 30-second video of just running water, but I'm going to first describe it because it's on the next screen and I think it autoplays. But what happened is I stepped to the edge of the creek. I was focused in on the rocks that the water was flowing. I mean, they're not rapids, but there was some strong water energy flowing over these rocks. And I just was so focused on the rocks. They're almost boulders, they're large. And I was just awed by them because I'm like, these rocks are trying to hold their place. They're trying to hold their ground. And yet there is so much motion and so much force and so much energy from the water overflowing the rocks that water is shaping and forming the rock into what it is. And I feel like it's the perfect metaphor for someone who is grieving, because that rock, you're trying to hold your ground. You're trying to like feel your authentic experience. And yet the world around you just keeps coming at you with energy and force and busyness and noise and joy and pain and everything, everything. And yet that all has an influence on you, that forms you. So I'm going to share this 30-second video, and I hope the metaphor has some resonance with you. And otherwise, just enjoy the sights and sounds of the flowing creek itself. Okay, thanks for taking a moment to experience that, and hopefully you saw some of what I tried to my best to articulate through words, that experience of those rocks trying to hold their place, basically in the rest of the experience. So we're at the time for our next breakout session. This is the last breakout session of the evening. Just a forewarning, I'm looking at the time here, and if you were expecting this to be a 60-minute presentation, I hope you can stay with us an extra 15 minutes, because through the flow of our experience together, I can tell this is definitely going to be about a 75-minute presentation, a 75-minute interactive experience. Going back to your breakout session, reconnecting with the people that you were with before, we have a prompt here. On the screen, it says, what events related to your loss have led you to the feeling of being isolated? And so I'm going to put you into the breakout room, reconnect with your peeps. Feel free to share your response to that question. Feel free to expand on it. There will be 10 minutes total. So if there's 4 of us, that's about 2.5 minutes a person to share. I will give you another warning, 60 seconds before we return to the larger group. Remember to unmute yourself when you join the group, and have a great conversation with your breakout room. Away you go. Okay, now that we're rejoining the larger group, take a moment to have a drink of water. Please, I'm gonna mute everybody. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share my screen for the last time tonight. And in the sharing of the screen, we are gonna transition into the last portion of the evening, which is, let me find my slides, which is some insights, some tips for how to feel less isolation and how to feel more connected in the grieving experience. So I'm going to go back to our expert authors, and I'm going to sum up a little bit of what each states as far as a generalization. They obviously have many things to say, and they've written books about this kind of stuff. But to sum up, if you remember Bob Niemeyer at the Portland Institute for Loss and Transition, if I were to ask Bob Niemeyer, what should I do to feel less isolated and more supported, or excuse me, more connected in grief? I can't predict exactly what he would say, but based on what I found in my research, he would say something along the lines of seek support from others, whether it be from friends, family, a support group, in order to navigate the grieving process. So he's basically saying, don't do this alone. And there are times where I would definitely agree with Bob Niemeyer, and there are times I would disagree with him. It really depends on my mood. It really depends on the people in my environments, and it really depends on, my personality. As a highly sensitive person, it takes a lot longer for me to trust people. And so if I'm lacking trust, it's going to be hard to feel that sense of support. And some of you may resonate with that tonight. So moving on to what Megan Devine would sum up in her response, she would say, create communities. I'll speak to that word create in a second, but she says, create communities that are able to hold space for grief and offer support to those who are grieving in order to combat the isolation and disconnection that can come with loss. Now, I respect where she's coming from because I think a lot of times, to be quite honest and frank, Grief Refuge was created because I was looking for something that didn't exist. I was looking for something that would supplement grief support in addition to what happens in groups or in addition to what happens in therapy or counseling sessions. I was like, where does the support come in on a more frequent or everyday basis? And so that really created the idea for the Grief Refuge app because it publishes a supportive message every day. And so I was like, I really respect this thing about create. I often think about a lot of families, they start charities. I'm blanking on the names of some of these organizations that are started, but people really do things because they feel like in doing so, it can help other people who experience what they would claim as a similar loss. But it also, it's the form of healing, or it's actually a piece to healing some of their own grief because they're creating something. So if I can plant a seed for you tonight, if you're having an experience where the isolation has a depth to it, and you think there's a need for something to help mitigate this isolation, and you know that it doesn't already exist out there, I definitely invite you and encourage you to create it yourself. And if you want some, resources along the way, feel free to send me a message to the Grief Refuge website. I'm happy to point you in certain directions. To sum up David Kessler's response, he would say something along the lines of find support from those who can offer empathy and understanding, whether it be through a support group, therapy, or simply spending time with loved ones who are willing to listen and offer support. So I see some similarities, emerging here. And some of you may be thinking, easier said than done. And if that is part of your experience, there's truth in that. I definitely agree that it's easier said than done. And Therese Rando, she would say, ask for what you need from others and don't expect others to know what your needs are and what your limits should be. Thank you, Therese. That was a very direct response. I love it though. I really do, honestly. But I kind of read between the lines where she's like, advocate for yourself. Don't worry about bothering or burdening someone else. Don't worry about being an a-hole or the B word. Just advocate for what your needs are. Alan Wolfelt. Now, he would say build bonds with others through proximity, repetition, and quality time. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit more. I've got a little bit more literature from Alan on that because that is a little bit abstract. So, Alan Wolfelt, what are you talking about? And so what he is adhering to is he says, when we're physically near someone frequently, we're more likely to develop a strong relationship with them, whether that's being together, or he says being together in person is best, but when that's not possible, such as when people live in different communities, for example, it's still possible to maintain close ties throughout frequent video calls, and emails, and texts. He says, but quality time, it's the essential factor here. The emotional bonds are built on quality time, which means time spent with another person or with people in which you are focusing on each other, communicating well, and empathizing. And I haven't been a fly on the wall in your breakout rooms, but I trust that you have experienced some quality time in the breakout rooms tonight or with me in the larger group throughout some of the experience today. Lastly, Wolfelt wisdom here. He says, you are a worthy person who needs and deserves connection. And he says, just trust there is help and there is also hope. So this is not a breakout session because we're coming to the end of our time, but this is a self check-in. There's been a lot of information shared here, whether that's why grief is isolating and some of these tips and recommendations for how to feel less isolated and to feel a bit more sense of connected. So this check-in, I'm just going to ask you, it's something to have a moment of self-reflection upon. If you feel inclined, please enter your response in the chat, but no necessary need to. But my prompt is, when you've heard these authors speak to the support, what themes emerge for you? And then also, what are some of these things that, in your experience, have seemed easier said than done? So reflect upon that. And then I'll just, kind of sum up, my perception of what these authors have shared. I tend to believe that most experts, they suggest joining a group or talking to a grief counselor, and I'm all for that. I've been there in my experiences when I've been deep grieving the loss of family members specifically, that I've struggled with grief with. Now, some of you may have had experiences where it's been hard to find a good group or a counselor that has openings. I know that a lot of great counselors, they're booked full. I happen to live with one of them. As you search for a good group, I'm going to give you a little bit of things to look for in considering on this next slide. So in facilitating and helping organize groups that are facilitated by some of my esteemed colleagues, here's some of the things. These 5 bullet points really stand out on this slide. One of the things that you should really look for is structure. And that means, is it an open group where anybody can join at a certain time, or is it a closed group where you have a certain start and you have a certain end date? I definitely, I think in my experiences, the closed group tends to be a little bit more trustworthy, a little bit more supportive. There's a little bit more of knowing what to expect as far as like the structure of how things proceed within each time you meet. I also recommend, check out the background and the experience of the facilitator. Like, they don't necessarily need all the credentials after their name. There's some great peer-led support groups, facilitated by people who have lost loved ones and, have really journeyed through grief. That can go a really long way. It doesn't always have to be a counselor facilitating the group, but maybe read their story, maybe understand, like a little bit about how they communicate their experience with grief to help you better understand if their group is going to resonate with you or not. Then also the bullet point here is tone and values. It's hard to know that up front. You kind of got to know somebody to know what their values are, and also like the tone, like how things are communicated, like how they speak and the words they use, etc. Their nonverbals. But reach out to someone, like say, hey, empower yourself to ask a few questions if you feel like you need a good support group. And then also understand, is there a specific topic, what the themes are, what's the scope, is it going to be too much, too overwhelming? Is it going to be not enough? Many closed groups offer a bit of, just for lack of a better term, I would call it a syllabus. I know that's not the right word, but it's getting towards the end of my evening now, and I'm a little, the words aren't coming as easily. And then also, early on at the beginning of the presentation, I was talking about intentions. The intentions, they're really important to know like where the facilitator wants the energy to go or flow. And then also what kind of agreements you make, first and foremost, confidentiality at its most. One thing I think that really can cause harm to a support group, especially for grieving people, is if there's tremendous sarcasm. So if there's an agreement to kind of whatever the opposite of sarcasm is, just kind of keep it more cordial at least. And so you feel that supportive tone. So those are some things about groups that I just wanted to kind of bring to your attention if you choose to go from this point to seek out a group, whether that be with Grief Refuge or somewhere else with another organization, there are amazing groups everywhere. And now that the pandemic changed our lives forever, a lot of them do happen online. So with that said, I actually do want to make a brief announcement for an upcoming group here through Grief Refuge. The group will be called Feeling Less Alone. And I just wanted the topic itself, I would love it to be more positive, to be fully transparent, but at the same time, I see it being like clearly stated as far as its intention. And I just didn't know, I didn't have anything better to call it. So it really is focused on feeling less alone. And it's to help the participants feel a strong sense of connection. It's also to help the participants feel more seen and heard in their experience. But here's what I'm really excited about, actually. So this is a 4-week closed group, and it's actually a bit of a hybrid between what I would call a class or a course and also a support group, because each week we're going to be focused on a theme that is like specific to what helps us feel less isolated. So example, like one topic would be self-care. So in our self-care experiences, the experimentation would be is like, as me being facilitator, I will be sending prompts to like, hey, maybe try this. And, no judgment, of course. If you don't feel comfortable trying it, you just say, I don't feel comfortable trying it. But if, you're willing to take that risk, for lack of a better word, it's that experimentation. And it's really like to help you through your own grief journey. And then, we'll be discussing these these successes and these failures in these experiments. And I just know that through our human nature, that'll create a strong sense of bonding for all of the participants. So that starts on May 30th, and I'll be following up tomorrow through our email, sharing the link. And before the evening's done, I'm going to paste the link into the chat so that you can just check it out and see if it's, maybe something that you'd be further interested in. Okay, so in closing, I just want to share some general tips, specific tips that came to me from a person near and dear to my heart. And believe it or not, this was actually from my mother. My mother, she lost her soulmate, her husband, Warren, and they were together for 34 years. And I learned a lot from Chris, my mom, through her grieving process and me showing up as a companion and a son. And I wrote this article a couple years ago. It was titled, Why Do I Feel So Alone in My Grief? And I interviewed her to provide, some of her perspective in sharing how to feel less alone and honor your own process. And so these were her 5 tips. And number 1, she wrote, have someone to talk to that has been through the same experience. And she says, not just a friend, but also somebody with a listening ear. And it really helps when you feel understood. But then tip number 2, she says, never allow anyone else to run your grief. And she says, do it on your own time and in your own way, because of that, sometimes you may have to walk away from other people. And then tip number 3, know that you won't always feel the same way. And she says, as time goes on, you may still miss your loved one, but the grief will change. And believe it or not, it actually feels like it's more manageable. I specifically remember my mom basically having suicidal ideation, meaning she wasn't really intending to end her life, but she thought it was better for her after she lost her loved one, because she just couldn't bear to be without him. And so I really, that really stands out, this tip number 3, especially in her experience. Number 4, be kind to yourself. If there's something you would do as a treat when you're feeling good, do it as a treat when you are feeling sad. That's definitely some motherly advice from a Midwestern individual. I'm from Minnesota, by the way. Uh, Tip number 5, find an environment with a lot of negative ions. So she says being outdoors can help you. It helps you feel less suffocated and like your world isn't crushing you. The negative ions help you feel like there are more possibilities for your future. So in closing, just sum it all up, everyone. I'm thankful for your time. I'm thankful thankful for your participation, and I'm also thankful for like your attention to this matter. It's so important, and I'm just grateful that you're here to help learn and experience, to help feel some sense of connection, and it just this is everything to me. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart. I hope that you were provided some insights as to why grief can feel so isolating. I hope that you have some ideas for how to feel more connected and less isolated in the grieving experience. And since the last portion was a little bit more focused on groups, I hope that there is a group, or I hope that there is hope for finding a group that is a good fit for you. So that is going to do it tonight. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And in the chat, I am going to just paste a link as far as how to check out the Feeling Less Alone in Grief. I was going to say course, but it's more of a group. It's definitely more of a group than it is a course. But click on that link right now just to open it up, because once we end the meeting, it will all disappear. But thank you. So appreciate your time and attention. I hope the rest of your day is pleasant. I hope you feel some sense of comfort. And until we talk again, take care. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the full webinar replay. I am deeply grateful for your trust in Grief Refuge and all the stories, the insights, and the experiences shared here on this podcast. Grieving and healing is very important personal work. Without it, my opinion is that you could grow cold and bitter and struggle with experiencing joy and fun in life again. Remember that if you need more support right now, download the Grief Refuge app. It's a great and convenient way to feel soothed and supported as you grieve and heal. Please search for Grief Refuge on your phone's app store now. Also, please leave a rating and review for this podcast. We fully listen to all the feedback and we use it to better serve your needs. So please rate and review the Grief Refuge podcast on this podcast player that you're using now. Thank you. Take care. Keep honoring your grief. Keep listening to your heart. Be kind to yourself and talk to you soon.